He struck a small girl outside the royal gates. The guard abandoned tradition to act heartfelt. The morning sun had just started to rise over the royal city, painting the cobbled streets with golden light. Outside the majestic royal gates, the city was already awake, buzzing with activity. Merchants arranged their stalls carefully, shouting their greetings to passers-by and advertising the fresh fruits, colorful fabrics, and handmade trinkets they had brought to sell. Children ran around laughing, chasing one another between the carts, while women carried baskets on their heads filled with vegetables, flowers, or bread. The air smelled of fresh flowers, baked bread, and the faint scent of incense from the small temple near the corner. Near the main entrance of the royal gates, a small girl stood on the edge of the square. She was no older than 8, with wide, curious eyes and hair that fell in soft waves over her shoulders. In her tiny hands, she carried a small basket filled with freshly picked flowers from her mother's garden. Bright reds, yellows, and pinks spilled over the edges, filling the air around her with their sweet fragrance. She had carefully tied each bunch with a thin, fraying ribbon, hoping that today she would sell enough to buy a small treat for herself, a piece of honey cake or maybe a sweet roll. Her eyes sparkled with hope as she watched people pass by, praying someone would notice her flowers. The crowd around the gates was dense, moving in waves as people hurried to their destinations. Guards in their polished uniforms stood at intervals, observing the crowd with serious expressions, their hands resting lightly on their spears. It was a place of importance and respect. Only the bravest or most careful dared approach the gates without permission. The gates themselves were enormous, made of strong, dark wood with golden decorations that gleamed in the morning sunlight. They marked the entrance to the royal palace, a place of strict rules, where tradition and protocol guided every movement and every decision. As the small girl arranged her flowers one by one, trying to make them look inviting, a man pushed his way through the crowd. He was taller than most, dressed in a dark coat that showed signs of wear, and his face carried an expression of impatience and irritation. Perhaps he had been in a hurry, or perhaps he was just a man who did not care to notice the little lives around him. As he brushed past people, his elbow accidentally struck the small girl. She stumbled back, her basket tipping over, and the flowers tumbled onto the stones, scattering in every direction. The sound of petals hitting the ground was soft but startling in the sudden silence that followed. The girl cried out, a small, frightened sound that drew a few heads from the crowd. Some people paused to look, but most continued on their way, unwilling to intervene. Tradition dictated that the royal gates were a place of order, and civilians were expected to mind their own business unless officially called to act. Guards were there to maintain discipline and safety, but they rarely interfered in minor incidents unless someone was in serious danger. Yet, in that moment, one guard could not look away. His name was Eric. He was young, with clear eyes and a strong posture, trained to follow rules without question. He had seen many things in his years guarding the gates, but the sight of the small girl, trembling on the ground with flowers scattered around her, made his heart tighten. The man who had struck the girl didn't stop. He walked on, muttering under his breath, seemingly unaware or uncaring of the harm he had caused. The girl remained on the ground, clutching a few petals in her small hands, tears rolling down her cheeks. She felt helpless and alone, surrounded by people who either ignored her or did not know how to help. Eric hesitated, standing still for a moment. He knew the rules, knew that intervening in such matters without orders could get him into trouble. Yet he could not shake the feeling that this small life deserved protection, that a mistake, however small, should not be ignored. Eric's thoughts drifted for a moment to his own sister, who had often played outside the city gates when they were children. He remembered her laughter, the way she would chase butterflies in the gardens, and how, once, she had fallen and scraped her knee. He had wished then that someone had helped her immediately. The memory tugged at him, stronger than any concern about rules or protocol. He saw the girl on the ground and felt the same urgent need to act, to reach out, to make sure she was safe. The crowd had begun to murmur. Some voices whispered concern for the child, while others muttered about how rules were rules and why should one guard risk discipline for a small mistake. Eric's mind wrestled with the weight of his duty versus the call of compassion. The guard in him knew the rules perfectly. The human in him knew what was right. He looked at the small girl again, her little face twisted with fear, her tiny hands trembling as she tried to gather the fallen flowers. The petals were crushed underfoot by hurried pedestrians, their bright colors fading against the gray cobblestones. Something inside him stirred, a mixture of anger, pity, and determination. Finally, Eric stepped forward. His boots clicked against the stones, and his uniform gleamed under the morning sun. The sound drew the attention of the girl, who looked up with wide, hopeful eyes. Her tears had not yet dried and her small body trembled with fear, but there was a glimmer of trust in the way she watched him approach. Eric knelt beside her, careful not to frighten her further. "It's all right," he said softly, his voice steady but kind. "I'm here to help. Let's pick these up together." The girl hesitated for a moment, then nodded, grateful that someone had come. Together, they began to gather the flowers, placing them gently back into the basket. Eric's hands were large compared to hers, but he was careful, treating each flower as though it were as delicate as the little girl herself. He could feel the softness of the petals, the lightness of the basket, and a warmth in his chest that came from doing what he knew was right. Around them, the crowd watched silently. Some looked surprised, others impressed. The rules had been bent, but here was an act of humanity that could not be ignored. The man who had struck the girl had paused a short distance away, watching Eric without understanding the courage it took to act. For a moment, he looked uneasy, as if he had suddenly realized that his impatience and rough behavior had consequences. He shuffled his feet and muttered something under his breath, but Eric did not look at him. His focus was entirely on the small girl and the basket of flowers, on making sure she was safe and comforted. The girl, feeling the warmth of Eric's presence, began to relax. Her tears slowed and a small smile appeared on her face. The tension in her tiny body eased and she whispered, "Thank you." Eric smiled back, a soft, reassuring smile. "You're welcome," he said. "Everyone deserves to be safe, especially someone as small and brave as you." The words were simple, but they carried weight, comfort, and reassurance. As the morning sun climbed higher, the city outside the royal gates continued its daily rhythm. But for a moment, the world seemed to slow down for the small girl and the young guard. In that quiet bubble of compassion, rules and tradition faded into the background. What mattered most was kindness, courage, and the simple act of helping someone in need. Eric knew that he might face questions later, perhaps even reprimands, but none of that mattered. The important thing was that a small life had been protected, a smile had been restored, and a small but powerful lesson in humanity had been given. And so, outside the royal gates, amidst the hustle of the city and the grandeur of the palace beyond, a small girl and a young guard shared a moment that neither would ever forget. A moment where courage and kindness triumphed over fear and indifference, setting the stage for what would come next. After helping the little girl gather her fallen flowers, Eric stood up slowly, brushing dust from his uniform. The crowd outside the royal gates had begun to disperse, some returning to their business, others whispering to one another about what they had just witnessed. Even though the incident had been small, it had caught people's attention. There was something about the way a young guard had stepped forward to help a child when tradition said he should not, that made the crowd pause and think. Eric could feel their eyes on him, and for a moment, a pang of nervousness passed through him. Rules were rules and tradition was tradition. He was trained to follow them without question. But this time, he had acted differently. He had followed his heart. The little girl clutched her basket tightly, looking up at Eric with eyes full of gratitude. Her tiny face was still streaked with tears, but the fear in her eyes had lessened. "Will he come back?" she asked in a small, trembling voice. Eric glanced over at the man who had struck her earlier. The man had disappeared into the crowd, walking quickly as if trying to erase the moment from his memory. "I don't think he will," Eric said gently, crouching down to be at her level. "But don't worry, you're safe now." The girl nodded, still clutching her flowers. She looked around nervously, noticing the other people in the square. Some had stopped to stare, while others continued their busy routines. She whispered almost to herself, "I was so scared." Eric placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I know," he said softly. "I can see that, but now you're okay. You don't have to be scared anymore." As he spoke, Eric's thoughts wandered. He had always been a disciplined guard, careful to follow every rule and tradition. The royal gates were more than just an entrance to the palace. They were a symbol of order, respect, and authority. Guards were expected to maintain a certain distance from civilians, to act only when absolutely necessary. Intervening in a personal dispute, even to help a child, could have consequences. Yet, standing there beside the small girl, Eric realized that sometimes, following the heart was more important than following the rules. Eric took a deep breath, thinking about what had just happened. He remembered how the girl had fallen, how helpless she had seemed, and how quickly the man had walked away. He remembered the crushed petals scattered on the cobblestones and the look of fear in her eyes. That image stayed in his mind, pressing against his sense of duty and challenging his training. Was it more important to follow protocol, or to ensure the safety and happiness of someone who could not protect herself? The answer was clear in his heart, even if it went against everything he had been taught. The girl looked up at him again. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't know anyone would help me." Eric smiled, a warm expression that softened his usually stern features. "Sometimes people are too busy to notice," he said, "but that doesn't mean there's no one who cares, and right now I care." For a few moments they stood together quietly. The city around them continued its morning rhythm. Merchants called out to customers, children played and laughed, and the occasional clatter of carts on cobblestones filled the air. The royal gate stood tall and imposing behind them, a reminder of the strict rules and expectations that governed their lives. Yet in this small moment the rules seemed to fade, replaced by something stronger: compassion, courage, and human kindness. Eric noticed the girl's hands were still trembling slightly. He decided to walk her a short distance away from the busy square, to make sure she was completely safe. He offered his arm gently, and the girl took it, feeling comforted by his presence. As they moved, Eric asked her simple questions, trying to distract her from the fear that still lingered. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mila," she replied softly. "That's a beautiful name," Eric said with a smile. "I'm Eric. It's nice to meet you, Mila." She smiled faintly, feeling a small spark of trust grow inside her. The connection between them was simple yet powerful: a guard who had chosen to act with kindness, and a small child who needed protection. As they walked, Mila told him a little about her life. She lived with her mother and younger brother, helping her mother with small chores and occasionally selling flowers in the square to earn a few coins. Her mother had always told her to be careful near the royal gates, warning her that the area could be dangerous if people were not careful. Eric listened patiently, nodding and responding with gentle encouragement. He realized that this small girl carried her own quiet courage. Despite the fear, she had tried to keep her basket steady, to pick up her flowers and to continue her day. That resilience inspired him. It reminded him that bravery was not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it was quiet, small, and steady, just like Mila's actions. As they walked, Eric began to think about what he would do next. Tradition dictated that he should return to his post and leave the matter alone. Yet, he could not bring himself to do that. The memory of the girl's frightened eyes haunted him, and he knew that if he left her alone in the crowd, she might feel unsafe again. He decided to remain with her for a little while longer to ensure she reached a safe place. They reached a quiet corner near a small fountain where merchants did not crowd, and the sound of water added a calming rhythm to the morning. Mila sat on the edge of the fountain, clutching her basket of flowers close. Eric knelt beside her again, speaking softly. "Do you have someone you can go to?" he asked. "My mother, she's at home," Mila replied. "I just wanted to sell a few flowers first." Eric nodded thoughtfully. He considered accompanying her all the way home, but he knew that doing so might attract attention from his superiors. Still, he wanted to make sure she was safe. "Okay," he said, "I'll stay with you until you're ready to go home, and we'll make sure nothing else happens to you." Mila's eyes brightened slightly at his words. She felt a sense of relief, knowing someone was looking out for her. As they waited, Eric scanned the area, keeping a watchful eye on the crowd. Most people had returned to their daily routines, but he remained alert, ready to intervene if needed. It was a strange feeling for him, not the strict enforcement of rules he was trained for, but a quiet vigilance driven by care and compassion. Eric also noticed something else. As he helped Mila, he realized that others in the crowd had begun to pay attention in a different way. Some people had stopped and were watching quietly, curious about why a guard would break protocol to help a child. Others whispered to each other, some nodding in approval. Eric realized that acts of kindness could ripple outward, influencing others in ways that rules alone could not. The morning passed slowly but peacefully. Mila gradually calmed, and her laughter returned in small bursts as she played with a stray pet kitten that wandered near the fountain. Eric watched her, feeling a quiet pride. The fear that had once filled her eyes was gone, replaced by a sense of safety and trust. He thought about how small actions, choosing to intervene, speaking a kind word, offering help, could have a powerful impact. He also reflected on his own life, realizing that courage and compassion were sometimes more important than obedience and tradition. Eventually, Mila's mother arrived, hurrying toward the fountain with worry etched on her face. Seeing her daughter safe and smiling, she ran to embrace her, tears of relief in her eyes. "Mila, are you all right?" she asked, holding her tightly. Mila nodded, looking up at Eric. "I'm okay, Mother," she said softly. "Eric helped me." Her mother looked at Eric with gratitude, eyes wide. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." Eric simply smiled and nodded. "I'm glad she's safe," he said. "That's what matters most." As the mother and daughter walked home together, Eric returned to his post near the royal gates. He straightened his uniform, took a deep breath, and felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had broken tradition, yes, but he had done the right thing. He had acted with compassion, courage, and integrity. And in that moment, he understood that being a guard was not just about following rules. It was about protecting people, even when it meant stepping beyond protocol. The incident outside the royal gates would later become a quiet story in the city, whispered among merchants and citizens. It was a story of courage, of a young guard who chose humanity over tradition, and of a small girl who learned that even in a busy, bustling world, there were people who cared. For Eric, the day remained in his memory as a reminder that kindness, no matter how small, could shine brighter than rules and expectations. And so, outside the royal gates, as the city continued its daily rhythm, Eric watched over the square with a new understanding. His duty was not just to the rules, but to the people, and he knew that his choice to act with compassion had made a difference, not just for Mila, but for everyone who witnessed it. After the morning's incident outside the royal gates, the city returned to its usual rhythm. Merchants shouted their offers louder, children laughed and chased one another across the cobblestones, and the scent of freshly baked bread and flowers filled the air. Yet, for Eric, the events of that morning lingered in his mind like a quiet echo he could not shake. He returned to his post near the gate, but his thoughts were elsewhere, replaying the image of the small girl with her basket of flowers, trembling and afraid. He kept thinking about her tiny hands clutching the scattered petals and the look of relief when he had knelt beside her. That look stayed with him, and for the first time in his service, he wondered about the fine line between duty and compassion. Eric stood tall in his uniform, his spear resting against his shoulder, eyes scanning the crowd as he always did. Yet, something had changed. Before, he would have ignored a minor accident like this, following protocol without question. But today, he had acted differently. He had stepped forward when tradition said to remain still, when rules said not to interfere. The choice had not been easy. His heart had waged war against his training, but in the end, it had won. Compassion had guided his actions, and now he felt a strange mix of pride and unease. As he watched the people moving past the gates, Eric noticed something unusual. A few citizens lingered, whispering to one another and glancing his way. Some nodded approvingly, others simply looked curious. Word of his actions seemed to have spread quietly through the square. A merchant called out from his stall, "Good work, guard." "You did well helping that little girl," another passerby added. "It is rare to see courage like that these days." Eric nodded politely, keeping his expression calm. He knew that while he had done what he felt was right, not everyone would understand. Some of his fellow guards might see it as a breach of protocol. But hearing the kind words from ordinary citizens warmed his heart and reminded him why he had acted. Despite the small recognition, Eric's mind could not rest. He kept thinking about the man who had struck the girl, the careless way he had pushed through the crowd, and the anger he had carried in his steps. What if something like this happened again? What if the man returned or someone else harmed a child? Eric realized that protecting people required more than following rules. It required vigilance, courage, and sometimes the willingness to step beyond what was expected. He felt a renewed sense of responsibility settle over him. As the morning passed, Eric noticed Mila and her mother returning to the square, walking slowly and carrying their basket of flowers together. The girl ran briefly to greet him, her smile bright and genuine. "Eric," she called out. "Look, I sold some flowers." She held up a small handful of coins, her eyes shining with pride. Her mother smiled warmly, gratitude clear in her eyes. "She's learning responsibility," her mother said softly. "And she has you to thank for keeping her safe this morning." Eric nodded, feeling a gentle warmth spread through his chest. Small moments like these, he realized, made all the difference. But as he returned to his duties, Eric could not ignore the unease that lingered. Later that afternoon, a senior guard approached him, his expression serious. "Eric," he said, "I've heard about what happened this morning. Intervening in civilian matters outside the gates, that's not what we are trained to do. You must be careful." "Tradition is in place for a reason." Eric bowed slightly, showing respect. "I understand, sir," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "But I felt it was necessary. The girl was in danger." The senior guard studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your heart was in the right place. Just remember, protocol exists for safety. There are always consequences for stepping outside it. Be prepared to answer for your actions if questioned further." Eric nodded again, feeling both relief and anxiety. He had done the right thing, but he knew he had also stepped into uncertain territory. His conscience was clear, yet the rules of the palace could be unforgiving. That evening, as the sun began to dip behind the city walls, Eric walked along the quiet streets outside the royal gates. The day had been long, filled with routine patrols and careful observation of the crowd, but his mind kept returning to the small girl and the events that had unfolded. He remembered the fear in her eyes, the way she had tried to gather her flowers, and the sense of helplessness that had filled her small body. That memory reminded him why he had acted, why he had chosen compassion over strict adherence to protocol. As he walked, Eric's thoughts turned to his own past. He remembered growing up in a small village near the outskirts of the kingdom, where he had often seen neighbors help one another in quiet, selfless ways. Acts of kindness were not always noticed or praised, but they mattered deeply. His own family had taught him to value integrity and empathy above all else. He realized that those lessons had guided him this morning, even when his training and duties suggested otherwise. Compassion was not weakness, it was strength, and sometimes it required courage to show it. The next day, Eric returned to the gates, expecting the routine of his duties to resume. Yet, something had changed in the air. Citizens greeted him with friendly nods or small smiles, and a few whispered words of thanks as they passed. It was clear that the story of his actions had spread further than he realized. People admired not just his courage, but the humanity he had shown. Eric felt a quiet pride, but he also understood that recognition was not why he acted. He acted because it was right. He acted because someone needed help, and he could provide it. Later that afternoon, as the square grew busier, Eric noticed a commotion near the fountain. A young boy had tripped and dropped a basket of apples, and the crowd was unsure what to do. Eric moved quickly, remembering the lesson from yesterday. He approached the boy and helped him gather the fallen apples, offering calm words of encouragement. "It's okay," he said. "Accidents happen. Let's get these back in your basket." The boy's face lit up with relief and gratitude, and the crowd watched silently. Eric realized that courage and kindness were contagious. His actions could inspire others to act with empathy, even in small ways. As the day ended and the sun cast long shadows across the city, Eric reflected on the events of the past 2 days. The incident with the small girl had been more than a moment. It had been a turning point. He understood that his role as a guard was not only to enforce rules but to protect, to care, and to act when needed. Courage was not always about facing danger in battle. Sometimes, it was about standing up for what was right, even when it went against tradition. That evening, Eric returned to the guardhouse, where he recorded the day's events in the official log. He described the incident with the small girl, noting the details carefully but also including his reasoning. He wrote about how he had acted out of compassion, how he had ensured her safety, and how he had learned an important lesson about the balance between duty and humanity. As he finished writing, he felt a sense of completeness. The words on the page were a record not just of his actions, but of the values that guided him. Later, as he prepared for the night watch, Eric thought about Mila and her mother. He hoped they were safe at home, and he felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that his actions had made a difference in their lives. He understood that every day brought challenges, and that being a guard required not only strength and vigilance, but empathy and courage. The memory of the small girl with her basket of flowers would remain with him always, a reminder that acts of kindness, no matter how small, could change lives. And so, Eric stood at his post outside the royal gates, the city quieting around him, and he knew that he would never forget the morning when he chose to follow his heart. It was a lesson in humanity, courage, and compassion, a lesson that would guide him for the rest of his life. The story of the small girl, the scattered flowers, and the guard who dared to act would live on, not just in whispers among the citizens, but in Eric's own heart, reminding him always of the power of kindness. The next morning, the city outside the royal gates woke slowly, the sun spilling warm light over the cobblestones. Merchants were arranging their goods carefully, their voices calling out to attract customers, and the air smelled of fresh bread, flowers, and morning dew. Children ran and laughed, chasing one another, their small feet creating a rhythmic sound against the stones. Life continued as usual, but for Eric, the morning carried a sense of responsibility that weighed heavier than the sun on his shoulders. He had thought about the events of the past 2 days constantly. The incident with the small girl, Mila, had not only changed how the citizens saw him, but it had changed him as well. Before, his focus was always on discipline, procedure, and tradition. Every decision was measured, every action weighed against the rules he had sworn to uphold. But now he understood something deeper. Duty was not only about following rules, it was about caring for people, about acting with empathy and courage when it was needed most. As he patrolled near the royal gates, Eric's attention was drawn to a familiar figure in the crowd. Mila was there, accompanied by her mother, carrying her basket of flowers. She ran toward him with a bright smile, waving. "Eric, look, I sold all my flowers today," she exclaimed, her excitement filling the air. Her mother smiled softly, her eyes showing gratitude and pride. "She has learned so much thanks to you," she said, nodding toward Eric. Eric crouched down to meet Mila's gaze. "That's wonderful, Mila. I'm proud of you. You were brave and careful." Mila's smile widened and she hugged his arm briefly before skipping back to her mother. Eric straightened, a warmth spreading through him. He realized that the impact of a single act of kindness could last longer than he had ever imagined. A small gesture, an act of courage, could create ripples that affected many lives, not just the one he had helped. As the morning continued, Eric noticed something troubling. A group of older boys had gathered near a fruit stall, and their rough behavior was drawing attention. They were shoving one another and laughing loudly, causing small children to step aside nervously. Eric's eyes narrowed. Though this was a minor disturbance, he could see that if left unchecked, it might lead to trouble. He remembered the lesson of the past 2 days. Courage was not just for emergencies, it was for everyday moments where intervention could prevent harm. He approached the group calmly, speaking in a firm but gentle tone. "You must be careful," he said. "This is a busy place and others need to move safely. Please respect them and your surroundings." The boys looked at him with surprise, their laughter faltering. One of them mumbled an apology, and the others followed quietly. Eric's simple act of guidance prevented potential accidents and reminded him that small gestures of authority combined with care could have meaningful effects. Later that afternoon, Eric found himself observing the crowd more closely than usual. His thoughts were drawn back to Mila. He wondered if she had shared the story of what had happened with her friends or the people in the square. He imagined her telling them how a guard had helped her, showing that courage and compassion were just as important as rules and tradition. It struck him how powerful stories could be, how a single incident could inspire others to act kindly and responsibly. As the day progressed, Eric noticed a commotion near the fountain. A woman had dropped a basket of fruit, and her small child was crying nearby. Without hesitation, Eric moved forward, kneeling beside the woman and helping her gather the scattered apples. "It's okay," he said softly. "Let's get these back together." The woman looked at him with relief, her eyes moist with gratitude. "Thank you, kind sir," she said. "You are a good man." Eric nodded, smiling gently. "Everyone deserves to be safe," he replied. "That's the most important thing." The incident reminded Eric of the delicate balance he needed to maintain. Being a guard meant he had to uphold the rules, but being a human meant he had to act with compassion, even if it meant bending tradition slightly. He realized that courage was not just about confronting danger or following orders. It was about protecting, guiding, and nurturing the people who relied on him. And sometimes, that protection required patience, observation, and subtle action rather than loud displays of authority. As the afternoon sun dipped toward the horizon, Eric reflected on the events of the past days. He thought about Mila, her mother, and the grateful citizens he had helped. He remembered the fear in Mila's eyes and the small relief she had shown when he knelt beside her. Each memory was vivid, reminding him why he had chosen to act, why he had followed his heart instead of merely following rules. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. While on patrol, Eric's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden shout. Across the square, a man had tripped over a loose cobblestone, and a heavy cart was rolling dangerously close to him. Without hesitation, Eric ran toward the man, pushing him out of the way just in time. The cart clattered harmlessly to the ground and the man stumbled but remained unhurt. A few onlookers clapped softly, some whispering praises for Eric's quick thinking. He helped the man steady himself, offering calm words of reassurance. "You're safe now," he said. "Be careful next time." The man nodded, his face showing relief and gratitude. Eric straightened, brushing dust from his uniform, and looked around at the crowd. He realized that moments like these, though small and seemingly ordinary, were opportunities to act with courage and kindness. They did not require heroics, only awareness and the willingness to step forward. And in doing so, he could create a safer, more compassionate environment for everyone around him. As evening approached, Eric's attention returned to the royal gates. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the square, painting the stone walls with golden and amber hues. The bustle of the day had slowed, and the city seemed to exhale, settling into a calm rhythm. Eric felt a deep sense of satisfaction. His actions had mattered, not just in protecting the innocent, but in reinforcing a sense of trust and safety among the citizens. He realized that courage was not always loud or dramatic. It could be quiet, thoughtful, and patient, yet still have a profound impact. Later that night, Eric sat by the fountain, reflecting on everything that had happened. He thought about Mila and how a small act of kindness could change a child's perception of the world. He remembered the woman with the dropped basket, the man who had almost been hurt by the cart, and the boys he had guided earlier in the day. Each encounter reminded him that life was full of moments that required awareness, empathy, and action. Courage was not a single event. It was a habit, a choice made over and over, even in small ways. As he prepared for the night watch, Eric understood something important. The royal gates were more than an entrance to a palace. They were a space where lives intersected, where rules guided order, but where compassion guided humanity. A guard's duty was not simply to enforce tradition. It was to protect, to guide, and to act when necessary, even if tradition seemed to stand in the way. And sometimes, following the heart was the bravest thing a person could do. That night, as Eric stood under the starry sky, he thought about the future. He hoped that the people of the city would continue to act with kindness and courage, inspired by the small actions he had taken. He hoped that Mila would remember his help, not just for the safety it gave her, but for the lesson it carried. That there are people in the world willing to act with compassion, even when it is not required. And so, the royal gates remained as they always had, tall, imposing, and symbolic of tradition. But Eric understood that they were also a place where courage, empathy, and humanity could shine. The city would continue its daily rhythm. Children would laugh, merchants would sell their goods, and the scent of bread and flowers would fill the air. Yet behind the rules and the walls, the quiet actions of one young guard had created a ripple of compassion that would not be forgotten, a reminder that courage and kindness could exist even in the most ordinary moments. As the night deepened, Eric reflected one last time on the lesson he had learned. True bravery was not only about facing great danger, but about choosing to do what was right, even when it challenged tradition. And with that thought, he continued his watch, confident that he had made a difference, not just for Mila or the people he had helped, but for himself as well. The following morning, the city outside the royal gates woke to the soft glow of dawn. Merchants arranged their goods carefully, calling out to customers with cheerful voices, while the scent of fresh bread and flowers filled the air. Children ran past, laughing and chasing one another, their small feet striking the cobblestones with a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the city. Yet, amidst the lively bustle, Eric felt a quiet sense of purpose. The events of the past days had changed him. They had shown him that courage and kindness were as important as duty, and that sometimes following the heart was the bravest act a guard could make. Mila and her mother were already in the square, their basket of flowers in hand. Mila's eyes lit up when she saw Eric, and she ran to him without hesitation. "Eric, look," she exclaimed, holding up a handful of coins she had earned from selling her flowers. "I sold almost everything today." Her mother smiled warmly, pride shining in her eyes. "She is learning so much," she said softly. "All thanks to your help, Eric. You showed her that kindness exists in the world." Eric knelt beside Mila, smiling gently. "I'm proud of you, Mila," he said. "You were brave and careful, and you worked hard. That's why you succeeded." Mila beamed, her small face glowing with happiness. The morning passed in a quiet, peaceful rhythm. Eric continued his patrol near the gates, but he remained watchful, aware of the small details in the bustling city. He saw children playing safely, merchants attending their stalls, and citizens going about their day. But he also noticed small moments where his attention might make a difference. A child struggling to carry a basket of bread, an elderly man trying to navigate the crowd, a stray kitten near the fountain. Each instance reminded him that courage and kindness were not only for dramatic moments, but for everyday life as well. Later in the afternoon, Eric's attention was drawn to a disturbance near the fountain. A young boy had dropped his basket of apples, and the fruit rolled dangerously close to the fountain's edge. The boy froze, unsure what to do. Without hesitation, Eric approached, kneeling beside him. "It's okay," he said gently. "Let's pick these up together." The boy looked up at him, eyes wide with relief, and quickly began gathering the apples with Eric's guidance. People passing by paused to watch silently, and some whispered in admiration. Eric smiled quietly to himself. He realized that courage was not always about grand gestures. It could be quiet, patient, and gentle, yet still powerful. As the day continued, Eric reflected on the lessons he had learned over the past week. He remembered the fear in Mila's eyes when she had first fallen, the moment when he had knelt beside her to help, and the gratitude in her mother's expression afterward. He thought about the small boy by the fountain, the woman with the dropped basket, and the man he had helped the previous day. Each encounter reinforced the truth he had discovered. Duty was not only about rules. It was about responsibility, empathy, and the courage to act when someone needed help. In the late afternoon, as the sun began to lower in the sky, Eric noticed Mila walking toward him again, her basket of flowers lighter than before, a bright smile on her face. She held out one of the flowers to him. "This is for you, Eric," she said softly. "Thank you for helping me." Eric accepted the flower with a gentle smile, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Mila," he said. "It's beautiful. And it reminds me of why we do what we do to help others and make the world a little better, even in small ways." Mila's mother watched quietly from nearby, tears of gratitude glistening in her eyes. As evening approached, Eric noticed the citizens beginning to gather in the square, winding down their day. Merchants packed up their goods, children ran home to their families, and the city settled into a calm rhythm. The royal gate stood tall behind him, a symbol of tradition and order, yet for Eric, they had come to symbolize something more. They were a place where courage and kindness could shine, where the choice to act with empathy could make a real difference in people's lives. He understood that his role as a guard was not only to maintain order, but to protect, guide, and inspire those around him. That evening, Eric walked slowly through the square, observing the quiet life around him. He remembered the incident with Mila, and how a single act of courage had rippled outward, touching not only the girl and her family, but also the citizens who had witnessed it. He realized that true bravery was not always dramatic or grand. It was often quiet, thoughtful, and consistent, built from countless small actions. Each choice to act with compassion strengthened the trust between people and those who protected them, creating a safer and more harmonious world. As he passed the fountain, Eric noticed a few children playing near the water, their laughter filling the air. He paused, watching them for a moment, and felt a sense of fulfillment. He understood that every small act mattered, whether it was helping a child, guiding someone safely through the crowd, or showing patience and understanding to those in need. These acts created ripples, extending far beyond what anyone could immediately see. And he knew that his actions over the past days had begun such ripples, spreading courage and kindness through the city. Later that night, Eric returned to the guardhouse. He took a moment to reflect on the past week, recording the events carefully in the official log. He wrote about the incident with Mila, the guidance he had offered to others, and the lessons he had learned about the balance between duty and compassion. But more importantly, he wrote about the choices he had made, the courage it took to act, and the profound impact that small acts of kindness could have. He understood that while rules and traditions were important, the heart must guide action when someone's safety or well-being was at stake. As he prepared for the night watch, Eric thought about the future. He hoped that Mila would remember his help, not just as protection but as a lesson in courage, empathy, and humanity. He hoped that she would grow up knowing that there were people in the world willing to act with kindness, even when it was not required. He also hoped that his fellow citizens would see the value of small, thoughtful acts and be inspired to do the same. Eric stepped outside, standing tall under the starry sky. The city was quiet, with only the soft sounds of night echoing through the streets. He watched as the lanterns flickered along the walls, casting warm light on the cobblestones below. In that peaceful moment, he realized that his journey had changed him forever. He had learned that true courage was not measured by grand gestures or heroic deeds alone, but by the choices we make every day, the choice to protect, to guide, to care, and to act with kindness. The royal gate stood behind him, still imposing, still a symbol of tradition. But Eric knew that they now symbolized something more. They represented the moments when courage and empathy meet, when a guard chooses to step beyond rules to protect the innocent, and when small acts of kindness ripple outward to inspire others. He understood that his role as a guard was not just to enforce the law, but to act as a protector of humanity, a quiet force for good in a bustling world. As the night deepened, Eric's thoughts returned one last time to Mila. He imagined her playing safely with her friends, selling her flowers and smiling with confidence and joy. He hoped that she would remember the lesson he had shown her, that the world could be safe, that there were people willing to help, and that courage could take many forms. And with that thought, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had made a lasting difference in the life of a small girl and, indirectly, in the lives of everyone around him. In the quiet of the night, Eric stood at his post, the stars twinkling above him, and he realized something profound. The true measure of a person's courage is not in grand battles or public praise, but in the quiet, thoughtful choices made to protect and care for others. His actions had begun to weave a story of hope, courage, and compassion, a story that would live on in the hearts of those he had touched. And so, outside the royal gates, as the city slept under a blanket of stars, a young guard stood watch, proud not for recognition or reward, but for the simple knowledge that he had chosen to act with his heart. The small girl with the basket of flowers had learned her own lesson about bravery, trust, and hope. The citizens had witnessed that courage could exist quietly, thoughtfully, and consistently. And Eric had learned that being a guard was more than following rules. It was about making the world safer, kinder, and brighter, one small act at a time. That night, the city felt safer and hearts were lighter. And though the royal gates remained tall, imposing, and steadfast, they now also symbolized courage, compassion, and the quiet heroism of a young guard who chose to act when it mattered most.